I'm Daniela Wentz. I'm currently a fellow here at KK. I'm a media scholar with a focus on media history. I'm especially interested in the history of digital media and audiovisual media and the history of artificial intelligence, or the media history of artificial intelligence. I'm working on a book right now here at KK, which deals with the history of affective AI systems, and it's a book at the intersection of disability studies, so I try to bring in marginalized and overlooked perspectives into media historiography. Here at KK, I study the present and history of affective computing or artificial emotional intelligence by looking at very specific technologies, which are technologies designed and developed for the diagnosis and treatment or therapy of neurodivergent individuals, especially autistic people or autistic children, to be even more specific. Autistic people are said to have a certain deficit, which is called the theory of mind deficit, which means they are said to be unable to empathize with others, to read the emotions and understand the emotions of their counterparts, also have problems to understand their own emotions, and they are said to have problems to act adequately in social situations. And the claim of these technologies I look at is that they help in overcoming those deficits. For example, they come in the shape of smart data glasses with a small monitor here, also affect detection implemented, and they promise to work like an emotional prosthesis. So to read and understand the emotions of your counterpart and play them back in the form, for example, of an emoji on this monitor of the glasses, and then prompts via a speaker to how to react to the shown and detected emotion of your counterpart. Or they come as social robots, so-called therapy robots, which act as tutors or teachers to teach social skills, to teach empathy to the autistic children. And I'm interested in, on the one hand, in the epistemological and epistemic conditions of these technologies. So, for example, what are the bodies of knowledge they rely on? I'm interested in their operational logic, so how do they work and what are the consequences of how they work. But as I said, I also try to trace them back in history the history of affective computing, in the history of social robotics, but also in the history of psychiatry and the behavioral sciences. And the behavioral sciences, because what all the technologies I looked at have in common is that they rely heavily on behavior modification techniques that have been experimented with already in the 1940s or 50s. And this is maybe not very surprising, the fact that behaviorist techniques feed largely into the logics of digital media technologies or social media. This claim has been made here and then, and rightly so. And also those technologies, of course, are for example, highly gamified, because this is often discussed under the keyword of gamification. And in my research, I show that gamification has its root, or one of its roots, in the labs of radical behaviorists in the middle of the 20th century, so in their experimental culture of research. And I also show that this experimental culture of research of radical behaviorism is deeply intertwined with the history of autism research and autism treatment. So my claim is that autistic children especially have always been the testing ground or the test bed for behavior modification technologies in the 1940s, 50s and 60s until those affective digital technologies of today. And So in my work, in my historiographical work, I try not only to unpack this experimental culture of research, of radical behaviorism, but I also try to re-narrate the history and the story of these children, and not as passive test objects, so to speak, but as agents in their own right with their practices and agency. Since the very beginnings of affective computing and social robotics in the late 1990s, early 2000s, autistic people have been one of the main declared target groups of these technologies because of that empathy deficit or theory of mind deficit. But also, I mean, this is a cliche, but it's a claim nevertheless, because they are said to be more at ease when interacting with machines and technologies compared to interacting with humans. But there is more to that. If you look at the history of autism and at the history of social robotics, you see that from the very beginning of autism research and from the very beginning of robotics, autistic people and robots have been not only compared to each other, but there have been made a large parallelization between them. So there was a very strong claim of a autistic and robot likeness. So while on the one hand the typical autistic person is portrayed since the very first descriptions of autistic children in the 1940s as lacking empathy, emotionless in their expressions, as being machine-like, and without this famous theory of mind, which autism research also claims to be a prerequisite for being human. On the other hand, robots literally have been described as being autistic, specifically because they are not able to interact socially with humans, they are not able to read and understand their emotions, and so on and so on. And in my research of the history of social robotics, I was able to show that at the very beginning of social robotics, there has been the attempt to import these claims about autism and this theory of mind theory stemming from autism theory into robotics to create a theory of mind model and implement it into a robot in order to develop a robot with empathy. And then there comes like a whole kind of messed up logics which says that if we are able to give a robot a theory of mind, then the robot is able to convey it to autistic persons. So the robot imitates human movements, human behavior, human emotions in order to intervene into the non-human movements, behavior and emotions of autistic people. So and it does this by asking the child, its counterpart, to imitate the robot in order to overcome her or his own robot likeness. So I have been working in very interdisciplinary contexts for the last 10 years, and I would say that this has shaped me a lot. I really like to poach into other people's fields and to import what I find interesting in terms of concepts for my own work. So this is kind of, I would say, more or less the wild side of my research culture, but then there is also a very boring side. I go to archives and open boxes, which I love. It's very the most, for me, it's the most exciting time in the life cycle of a research project, and yeah, and then I go home and try to make sense of it, and that's about it already.